there, everybody. Meteorologist Andrea Michaels here, alongside
meteorologist Danielle Miller. Thanks for watching. We are talking all things winter weather today.
Yes, for the first time, our Weather Smart team has put together a winter weather outlook. And, you know, it was a little of a shorter, sort of TV-friendly thing that you might have seen starting on Fox 43 News on 10 Monday evening. But we wanted to talk a little bit more in depth about the nerdy and sciencey stuff that went on behind it.
A lot of number crunching went on, and we can't always show all that information on TV. So we're going to break it all down for you, talk a little bit about what went into this forecast, how we got our numbers, and of course, we'll go over those numbers once again.
Yeah, and some things that we found that stood out in particular when we were looking at similar conditions and whatnot, trying to crunch out the numbers and put together this forecast.
Yeah.
So with that said, let's get a looky and see what we're going to be talking about first, Miss Danielle.
Yeah, so we're going to break down kind of some of the different tools that we used to forecast long range. We've got to look at long-term trends, climate change, how are things being impacted over extended periods of time. We're also looking at global weather patterns, global ocean patterns, and we are finally... So this is something that you dove into the most, looking at analog years.
Yeah, and that's just a really fancy way of saying we looked at years with similar setups, similar patterns, and you know, that's kind of the process that goes into it. And you look at where the trends are going and what happened in these years. And we did it, we broke it down seasonally, and then we went month by month. Even though our forecast didn't go month by month, we did look at those and took those as individual months into account to kind of get our final numbers. So a lot goes into it, I will say. This was the part that I think took longer than I anticipated, Danielle.
Yeah.
It's a lot of very intense and a lot of very, what's the word I'm looking for? I want to say nitpicky work, but yeah.
Yeah, and we didn't...
Tedious, that's the word I'm looking for.
Yes.
Tedious stuff.
This is our first long-range outlook, so we did enlist the help of people who do this all the time.
Yes.
So we talked to the Climate Prediction Center. We talked to a professor at Millersville University to help us in learning and understanding this process with you guys.
Yeah, for sure. And the one thing that I learned more than anything was that a third-year La Nina, which we'll talk more about soon, but this was a good, I don't want to call it a practice year of sorts, but this was a good year to have, you know, a first run or a first crack at this.
Yeah.
And we'll get into the whys with that momentarily, of course. So moving on here, we'll start by talking about what we have here are the fastest warming seasons. You would kind of go into this a little bit more in depth here, Danielle.
So taking a look at our changing climate, something we talk about all the time. Our climate is warming, our climate is changing, and for most of the eastern half of the United States, you'll see all these blue dots here are cities that are seeing winter warming the fastest.
Yeah.
And it's most of the East Coast. You'll notice one lone yellow dot there, and that is Harrisburg. For Harrisburg, winter is the third fastest warming season. It does fall right behind summer, but they're neck and neck in that chart, as you can see. So we are seeing that trend in our temperatures, certainly.
And that was something that I have to say, it surprised me. I was even shocked that fall was last. We were talking a little bit about this beforehand. I would have thought that it would have gone winter, summer, fall, then spring. Yeah, so that was a little counterintuitive, but hey, and it's something new.
It's warming across the board, certainly.
Yes, for sure.
And looking at temperatures, Climate Central is a really good resource for us. They kind of bundle a lot of this data for us. So from their kind of package on winter warming, since 1970, Harrisburg has warmed 2.7 degrees in terms of our winter temperature. And that's average between mornings and afternoons.
Yeah. This isn't an average of the average highs. This is the average of the average temperature, which is really confusing to say it, but that carries more weight, the fact that this is a 2.7. It doesn't sound like a lot, but in the context of a 30-year increase, if not more, that is actually a pretty significant number.
Yeah, and when we were looking at climate as a whole, record keeping for Harrisburg goes back to 1888. In meteorology, you typically look at 30-year climate blocks, and we had to look at that most recent climate block to kind of take into account the current state of affairs.
Yeah, because everything has just changed. I mean, if you just want to say since the early 1900s, things have just changed so much. the atmosphere, the environment, it's in such a different state. And we'll talk about some of those subtleties too as we go through it a little bit more.
Yeah.
But there's a reason for sure that, you're only technically supposed to go back 30 or so years and usually not more than that, especially when you get into more neutral
Yep.
type El Nino, La Nina patterns. Otherwise, yeah, you're going to get a lot of wonky data
up
that's
and
going to
down.
be hard to sift through for sure because there's just so much variability. But we'll start by looking at your big picture stuff here. One of the first and foremost things that we look at is El Nino or La Nina. That is always, more times than not, even in a neutral state, it's kind of your primary driver and it tells you where you have to look here. So La Nina, what happens in La Nina is that the waters along the equator in the Pacific are actually cooler than normal. And well, that leads to some interesting weather patterns for us, Danielle.
Yeah,
right?
so everything is connected, obviously. So that cooler water actually kind of changes how the jet stream operates for us in the winter. And so we get this typical pattern setups where we've got a little bit of a dip in the jet stream in the central United States. And for us, storm tracks typically northwest of us in the La Nina setup. And you also see some of these patterns. It's a little drier in the southern U.S. You typically get a little bit warmer in the southeast U.S. And you're typically looking a little wetter in the Midwest. For us, we're kind of right in the middle of it all.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's not a clear cut, oh, no snow. It's not just automatically that.
Yeah.
There are other things that we have to look at. But, looking right at where that jet stream arrow is over the states, temperatures, especially through the first half of the winter, they can be pretty variable heading into at least about mid-January or so. If you are going to get, say, those really extreme type temperatures on the cooler side, for sure, your best shot at that is going to be through the first half of a La Nina season. And depending on where that jet stream sets up, you can sometimes, if it's a little more northwest, you could be setting yourself up for less snowy and then, of course, even warmer than you would expect. But if it kind of rides like a median, we're kind of in this weird spot in central PA where it's not just like automatically, no snow. It's going to be warm side like the whole way through, too. Yeah, there was a lot of learning here that was really interesting about this in so many ways.
And I think the one thing with La Nina to point out is, yes, we're in a La Nina winter, and this is our third La Nina winter.
You might have heard, if you're a really big weather nerd that likes to follow these things, it's been termed as a triple dip. And there aren't many 3-year La Ninas since the record keeping began. So the first third-year La Nina, since we've been tracking this, has been 75 to 76. So 2 years before that, too, this was a 3-year La Nina period. And I also believe this was one of the strongest on record, too. We did look at that one, even though it was beyond the 30-year period, but we just wanted to see more than anything. I was curious. I wanted to see if it would change my answer or change our answers or our thoughts in any way. Excuse me, in any way. And then the most recent one, and this is only the second one to happen, this was in 2000 to 2001. And then, of course, this winter would be the third since we've been keeping track of this for more than a century at this point. Yeah. Again, the records for Harrisburg have been since 1888. And I don't even, I think some of the patterns, the tracking doesn't even go that far back. It's just the numbers for Harrisburg. So we really weren't even able to look before the 1950s. Yeah. Which, on that note, there was a second year La Nina that we also looked at between 56 to 57. What we learned more than anything, because we did have to look at some second-year La Ninas, but what we learned, thanks to Kyle Elliott, was that, and we have to give him credit for a lot of this, because he did, really help.
And he's at Millersville.
At Millersville, yes, for sure. I'm kind of assuming here that you watched our winter weather special. But yes, he's, he was amazing, incredible, so knowledgeable. And they tend to, your second and third year La Ninas, they tend to act similarly because it's already established. First year La Nina is not so cut and dry, which is why, sometimes you have to look at more things than just, La Nina right off the bat, we're going to go warmer, we're going to go less snowy, because actually we did find some snowier La Nina seasons, and even some months in particular that overperformed, say February, for example, that overperformed. And as far as cold goes, underperformed, if you want to call it that. So, there are other things on that note that we had to look at to help come to this. Shall we move on?
Yeah, so that was one of our big
will.
players.
Yeah.
Our second big player when it came to looking at this forecast is going to be another weather phenomena in the ocean called the Pacific Decadal Oscillation.
It's a mouthful.
Yes.
You can just say PDO for short. So it's in its negative phase right now. And when it's in its negative phase, the waters along the northern part of the Pacific, particularly north central portion of the Pacific, those are usually warmer than normal. But what that allows for is from the Gulf of Alaska and down through the West Coast, you very often get cooler than average temperatures.
Yep.
When it's in its positive phase, just for, a little extra bit of information here, it's the reverse. You have that warmth along the western half or the west coast of the United States, and then cooler than average sea surface temperatures in the Pacific. But what a negative phase does, that it's in right now and has been more than not actually for quite some time.
This one doesn't move around like the La Nina, El Nino as much.
Yes, and that's why the word decade is in the name, because this, this can take 20, 30 years or so to see a shift. It's not very often that the shifts occur, say 10 years or less, although it has happened, but it's not that common, and they're usually brief swings.
Yes.
And not very strong type positive or negative patterns. But when it is in the negative pattern, because you've got the cooler ocean temperatures along the West Coast, you tend to be cooler and stormier there.
Yes.
When your jet stream dips out in the west, it tends to go up north and west.
Yep.
See the pattern here. So we tend to be warmer and drier. So this is our second driver that's leaning towards that direction this time around.
Yeah.
And I do want to note one of the analog years here.
Okay.
Now, this was a second year La Nina. It was 85 to 86. It was a particularly snowy one, and that's because 23.1 inches of snow fell in February, but the Pacific Decadal Oscillation was in it, the only out of our analog years. And this may be why this is an outlier. It's the only one that was in the positive phase, which would favor snowier conditions for us.
Yes.
And I also noticed, too, we had our next driver on our side with this analog year in particular. We had the stratospheric polar vortex, or the SPV. You might have heard this in the headlines a lot. It's often misrepresented, but let's give it a crack, Danielle.
All right. We don't have a graphic for this one, so I'm going to pull up our forecast here, but we'll talk about it briefly.
Yes.
Actually. Let's see. Here we go. So the polar vortex, obviously you hear about it. It's when you get those big kind of areas of cold air from the poles, and they swoop down and kind of come into the continental U.S., and it gets really cold.
Yes, and when it's a strong polar vortex, it's a little counterintuitive, because you think when the polar vortex is strong, and this is where I say it's often been misrepresented in the national headlines at times, it's not necessarily, the polar vortex, it's strong, it's back, it's coming our way. Actually, when it's strong, the cold air, it's all locked up in the poles.
It stays put.
It's when it's weak that we see those cold pockets of air, those cold chunks break down from the Arctic and dive into us.
Yeah.
So if you want snow, or want to at least set us up for the possibility of snow, you want a weak polar vortex.
Yeah.
And this is, a huge driver in terms of, is our pattern going to turn a little stormier? Is it going to be less stormy and therefore less opportunity to get snow?
Yes. And what we're seeing, this one's a little harder to predict long range.
Yes.
It's very hard. But at the moment, it's a little bit on the weaker side, potentially getting stronger as we go through the second half of winter.
Yes. Projections are that will happen. And I guess this is a common finding. In all of our analog years, it hasn't been perfect, but more times than not, it looks like it had been on the stronger side in our analog years compared to not. So that was also a factor to weigh in. And that kind of is another thing that continues to tilt us towards less snowy, not no snow. I don't think this is going to have the...
We've already seen snow. We're going to see snow.
Right? Yeah. I mean, everybody hears, no snow and warm. Not necessarily, That's just in the context of the whole season.
Yeah.
And just to kind of make my point here, Usually, what we've noticed, La Ninas don't affect Decembers too much. In fact, looking at all of the analog
Yep.
years with these 2 and 3 year La Ninas, Decembers have been pretty variable.
Yeah.
There have been some years where the month of December, temperature wise, in the most recent one, the 2000-2001, December was 9.3 degrees below average. This past one that we're coming off of, the second year La Nina.
Last year.
Last year, 21 to 22, 6.1 degrees higher than average. So December can be very variable. And January, it starts to mellow out a little, but something that was very notable and a very clear pattern, even in the February, I believe the February of 85 to 86. Let me check my notes really quickly. Okay, this was not actually it. This was an outlier where it was 29.9 degrees for the February temperature. So this was the only one that was actually cooler than average, and therefore might have been the reason, another contributor to the fact that it was a little snowier. But even in Februaries where we've been above average, I mean, we've still gotten anywhere from 7.2 inches of snow in the 99 to 2000 season to in the 2000 to 2001 season, 9.5 inches to as little as 2 inches last February. But the one notable thing that really stood out is that they tend to be mild more than not. In fact, 4 out of our 5 analog years that were within the last 30 years were warmer than normal by at least 1 degree. But some, I mean, even higher than that. Also, another thing that I do want to point out, too, about that. So that doesn't mean it's not going to snow, obviously.
Not at all.
Yeah, you can still get those colder bursts of air. It's just...
It's harder to line them up. You need the cold air. You need the storm track to be right. We could get one of those things, but not the other. So it might be a little harder to get the perfect storm this year,
so to speak. Yeah. And maybe the one, I don't want to call it a wild card, because I think the bigger wild card is the fact that the first half of the winter is going to be our best shot at those perfect things lining up just right for snow. I think by the time you get to mid-January, we might start to see that shift towards, your less favorable conditions. But something that really think about too is that we are going to go neutral by about the end of the winter. So that, although it's not like an immediate switch.
But it's a transition.
It is a transition. So that might provide a little bit of opportunity, say near the very end of February, but in particular in the spring. We might have to watch early March based on that. I'm not going to say there's going to be a lot of snow in March.
You heard it here first.
No. Let's get some context here. In terms of your everything lining up just right. There's some potential there to get, but we're not strangers to snow in March.
No.
I mean, we can get a couple inches.
Oh yeah.
And I'm not saying there's gonna be a foot of snow. It could just be something like a couple inches the first half of the month as like a little bit of a wild card too. So that's just something to keep in mind. I did see a lot of that when I was going through these numbers, was that a lot of them were nearing neutral by the spring. Only these, so when we did look back, and this is probably another reason, not to look back too far with your analog years, but I do think it is worth mentioning that even in our analog years, which were 56 to 57, that was a 2-year at that point, and then 75 to 76, that was a 3rd-year La Nina, those weren't very snowy overall. Also, we're not very snowy, I guess I should say. The 56 to 57, that was nearly average, but the average was a little different too at that time because the averages are taken over the past 30 years. You showed something similar to that moments ago in our slides, but also the 75 to 76, which is also one of the strongest La Ninas on record, the full season was like 18.3 inches. So, I mean...
So let's get to the numbers so we can
there is a
compile
history
all of
here.
that. Yes. So
there's history.
We use all of that between all of those different mechanisms and as well as climate change and analog years. This is our forecast. We'll start with temperature. Average winter temperature for Harrisburg, 33.3 degrees. We think we're close to slightly above So 33 to 35. And this is a meteorological winter for these temperatures here. So
Yes.
December 1st through the end of February.
That is definitely very important to take note here, Danielle. So March, obviously, if March is a little cold, that's not going to, like, say to start, hypothetically, that would not be included in this. And this cold past week in November, not going to be included in this also. But yes, and part of the reason for that, La Niñas aren't exactly, like, super, don't spell, real deep above average warmth for us. It usually doesn't mean that. You're only usually near to slightly above average. It's really the warm February, the leaning towards a warm February that really kind of tilts these numbers a little bit above average. If we were expecting February to not follow the general trends, then we would be probably closer to what's considered normal. I think, you'll find that the first half of winter is going to behave like you would expect winter to be. Do you want to move on to some snow now?
This is what everyone has been waiting for.
Exactly, I know.
The snow. So Harrisburg, we average, we'll call it 30 inches of snow in a season. So here's our forecast, and it's a range.
Yes, because ranges are usually the best way to go because, you've had as little as, let me just quickly check my notes here. You've had as little seasonally anyway as 12.5 inches in a second year La Nina, and that was 2011 to 2012.
It's pretty recent.
Yeah.
In the long scheme of things, sorry.
Yeah, in the long scheme of things for sure. To as much as the 85 to 86 year where it was 36.5 inches, which is a little above average. And that average was what was it? It was
a little
closer
higher
to 31 back then, the 30-year average. So even that was above average and noteworthy for sure. So, it's not a perfect science. Let's be real here. Meteorology, any science isn't a perfect science, although for some reason, I'm just going to put it out there. The expectation for some reason is there, folks. I don't know why, but we decided to go with a range, and we think in the context of a seasonal forecast that a 10-inch range is pretty fair. Yeah, it's appropriate. So 14 to 24 inches with that. I would be really shocked if we ended up with less than 14 inches. Because, you would have to get to what is it? 12.5 for a record low snow. And I don't see that. But we got I think it was 16 inches of snow last year, right? It was, and I think we have the potential, especially because second year La Ninas, we learned second and third year La Ninas can be very similar. And with a lot of the similar drivers too going into this season, I think we will actually be pretty close, right? Yeah.
And we don't want to just give you the range. We do want to give you a bold forecast.
Yes, we are going to put ourselves out here a little and, do it over the range of not just Harrisburg, but also because we've got a very diverse area here. You have Lewistown, it's hilly. We've got a lot of higher elevations there. You obviously tend to run colder. And then you've got Lancaster, which is, down more so lower in elevations than not.
The closer to 95 you get, 95, the more mixing happens in snowstorms, which could then lower your totals.
So, you can just go from one, what is it, a 60-mile drive across our area and
big difference.
Big difference climatologically speaking and even within a single season for sure. So we wanted to do that so that folks down southeast of Harrisburg and Lancaster County versus northwest and Mifflin County, Lewistown, the far outskirts of our little area that, you see us here on our newscast. Just to, give an idea of what you can expect there too.
So Harrisburg, our bold prediction, 19 inches, which is still below that average for this time of the year. But of course, not as much as Lewistown, Mifflin, and Juniata counties are going to get. And there we're forecasting the very high end of our range, 24.
And then 16 inches for Lancaster.
Should be
you
good.
You did not touch Lancaster yet, right? I did not just repeat what you just
said.
No,
I did not.
I thought so. But yes, so, and we think that's because, especially in a La Nina system, because of that track north and west, although we still could get stormier at times, especially through the first half with the polar vortex breaking through, they are more likely to be mixing events than they are to be all snow events, especially the farther southeast you live, because climatologically speaking across our 10-county area, that's the way it is. That's the way it works. more times than not.
And we will obviously check in at the end of the season.
Yes, we will hold ourselves accountable, folks,
Yes.
because I get it. These are some pretty bold predictions. But, we're fairly confident. I think we're fairly confident in this, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, I think I said this earlier. If there was a year to, give it your first crack, a third year La Nina where there's not a whole lot of record, but, the similarities.
We have enough clues out there to help us in.
The signals are strong.
Yes.
Especially hearing that second year and third year La Ninas can be fairly comparable in how they behave because they're established by then. I mean, second year La Ninas are mostly very clear as well. And even, the factors, so when you look at the parts, and by parts I mean like say the month or the general overview of the season, the outliers that seem to have been colder and snowier, whether it's the single month or the whole season, there were other factors at play that aren't the case this time around that match up similar years that ended up being a little on the warmer side and a bit less on the snowier side. So we're feeling pretty confident in this forecast. Of course, a little disclaimer here, Danielle.
Well, the weather changes. There's always changing. And we kind of talk about this when we do our forecast. We're very accurate 3 days out, 5 days out. The farther you get out, things can change. And it just takes one big snowstorm to make or break.
All you need during the first, and this is why we are kind of putting ourselves out here with our bold predictions here, is because it literally could just take one storm where everything just went
it all lines up
on December 29th, where the polar vortex, we got a little bit of cold. And then, some of our smaller, shorter range patterns that we look at, the Arctic Oscillation and the North Atlantic Oscillation, just happen to be negative, which means cold for us. So you can have the storm track on our side in those cases. That's all you need. And then, boom, there's 12 inches, and then we're going to be hoping no more snow the rest of the season. But, that's part of what comes with it. But, we are pretty confident. If there were to be a big storm, your best chance of seeing it is going to be now through the first half of the winter. It's going to become much more difficult for the reasons that you explained after that. So I think that's one of the takeaways, aside from less snowy and a little bit on the warmer side of averages for the season. The takeaway is that if you want that big one, the first half of the winter.
If you want it, fingers crossed for now.
That's going to be the time for it. Otherwise, I think we're looking at a lot of mixing systems and smaller systems.
And we'll get you through it. FOX43, online, on air. We'll get you through the whole snow season for sure.
Definitely. So be sure to check in for all of those updates. And like I said, we will hold ourselves accountable. We are going to see how we did at the end of the season, for better or for worse. Have a wonderful, safe, winter season.
Yes.
I want to say snowy season, but I know some of you want snow and some of you don't. So I'm a little afraid to pick a side there. So I'm just saying, let's all be safe.
Have
instead.
a great winter season.
Yes, have a great winter, and I hope it does whatever you want it to do one way or another.
See ya.